All right. Thank you, everybody, for convening so quickly. I wanted to welcome everybody to the second public session of the Knight Commission on Intercollegiate Athletics. And our session, this second session is entitled Designing a New Model for College Sports in the Face of Legal Realities. We could also call it Designing a New Model for College Sports in the Face of Everything that we once knew is out of control. Let me just start with a couple of housekeeping points just to remind people. The session is being recorded, and the recorded video and other meeting materials will be available on the Knight Commission site, knightcommission.org. Commission members and panelists should please use your microphones when speaking, because that way the virtual audience will be able to hear you. Media and public attendees are reminded that we will hold a press conference at 12:30 Eastern Time in the Farragut Square room here in the hotel. And for those who would like to participate virtually, we would welcome you to use the QR code on the screen to register for that participation. This session is a really great complement to our last session, because this one is presented by college administrators and athletes who are thinking about a new Division I model for their subgroup of institutions to address the legal realities and, social and public realities that we're facing these days. The leaders represent institutions that compete in the D1 Football Championships Subdivision and D1 institutions without football, a subgroup that includes 220 institutions and more than 100,000 college athletes. Some members of this group presented at this summer's MACTA convention, and we understand the working group has made important progress since that time. We just heard about the legal realities in which Division I sports is operating. The leaders that we will hear from now are going to talk about trying to forge their own path and recognize that one size does not fit all, which one of our commission members said earlier today, and that is very true. And as we think about sort of what are the ways that we're going to go forward, I think we need to keep that in mind, that one size simply may not fit all in the world of college sports. I'm going to just introduce the panelists in order of their remarks, and in the interest of time, I will not repeat their bios, which are found on the Knight Commission meeting website. Our panelists are first Michael Cross, who is the commissioner of the Southern Conference; Janet Cohn, senior administrator for University Enterprises and athletics director at the University of North Carolina in Asheville; Anthony Egbo. Hi, Anthony. I see you through the cameras. Vice Chair, NCAA Student-Athlete Advisory Committee, and a former football college athlete at Abilene Christian University. And finally, Meredith Page, Vice Chair of the NCAA Student-Athlete Advisory Committee and a volleyball student-athlete at Radford University. So the following the presentation from these panelists, John Alger, who is a Knight Commission member and president of American University and also a very, very dear friend of mine, will offer remarks before we hear questions from Commission members. So I think, Michael, you were going to start us off, and I thank you for that.
Thank you for the introduction, Pam, and great to be with all of you, and especially to share the panel with my colleagues here. So by way of brief introduction, I've been in college athletics for about 30 years, but I've only been a commissioner for one. And there are a lot of people who have a lot more expertise as it relates to the role of what a commissioner does and those types of things. But and I do want to be clear, my comments are not reflective of the full commissioner group. There are a lot of differing opinions about where we should go what we should do, how we should navigate the world of NCAA governance going forward. But my hope is that we can clarify and put some things on the table that indicate here are some high-level thinking ideas that we can then translate into some other pieces from Janet and the student athletes. So I do want to start and just say the question that Pam asked is a really good one. How do we manage going forward? And NCAA history, honestly, probably does provide some guidance. If you think back to 1906, when the NCAA was founded around health and safety issues. The NCAA didn't have anything other than a single division until 1957. For 50 years, it had a single NCAA division. Made the decision about 16 years later, to move to the current 3-division model. Division 1, 2, and 3 was back in 73. And then in 1978, the football designation came in with the establishment of 1A, which is now FBS, 1AA, which is FCS, and 1AAA, which is schools that don't sponsor the sport of football. So it's been a long time since the association really grappled with this question of how many divisions should we have. And my goal here is not to suggest that we should have a 4th division. The underlying and overarching sentiment is that there are ways, and I think very easy ways, that Division I can stay together, and I'll get into some of those things in a couple minutes. But a lot of the time that we're spending right now, we've heard the word complexity, we've heard these other comments, it feels like an episode of Seinfeld. And if those of you who watch it, they have the episode about Festivus. A lot of our time are spent airing the grievances. We're spending a lot of time discussing, what about this? Where's my representation? And all of these types of things lead to an environment where we have to figure out, how do we navigate some really key pieces? One, incredibly litigious. I mean, we've seen it's a daily deluge of, who's the next lawsuit. The prior panel brought up all kinds of interesting questions about Title IX employment. Clearly the legal landscape informs what we're doing. The second piece is really around alignment. And are we aligned? Are we not aligned? And I would argue that we're not currently very well aligned. And we will, again, represent and put forward some ideas about how that could change. And then the last piece is that we're incredibly bureaucratic. And the bureaucracy piece, I think, has not served us well. I think it has led us to some of the places and some of the issues that we're dealing with, and the failure to be able to act in ways that allow people to take care of some really legitimate issues. The Autonomy 4, Autonomy 5 conferences have legitimate concerns that need to be addressed. The CCA 22 have legitimate concerns that need to be addressed. And how do we continue to operate under one umbrella is really the question. So, it's been said that a picture is worth 1,000 words. And the slide that you're going to see momentarily really summarizes the dynamic as it relates to this. That's the current NCAA governance model. This is taken directly from the NCAA website, and it's labeled How the NCAA Works. And this is not to criticize the NCAA. This is a byproduct of at least 50 years of governance arrangements and lobbying groups and organic growth and trying to respond to different issues and things. And it's like many organizations, the evolution is not how you would have designed it. And this is really a point right now, because of all of the legal challenges, where we should really be having a conversation about what makes sense organizationally for Division I that holds it together but responds to the needs that people have out there related to some of their concerns. And some of those concerns are pretty straightforward. You hear questions like, what do we have in common? What should be governed in a shared manner and what should be separate? How do we reduce bureaucracy and regulate less? Who should enforce certain things? Very importantly, how do we avoid future litigation, antitrust issues, and those types of things? And just as importantly, how does Division I stay together under one competitive umbrella? So as you think about many of the things we're seeing in this graphic here, what happens a lot of time is, you talk about regulation, and everybody thinks about regulation for you, but no regulation for me. We deal with all kinds of waiver processes. We deal with all kinds of workarounds. And, a lot of this gets pushed back to the NCAA. If you don't like a rule, you go and seek a waiver. If you don't get the waiver you want, you get on a PR campaign, criticize the NCAA and lawyer up. there's all these different things, and the cycle repeats. And oh, by the way, state legislators are weighing in on these types of things. We just saw this yesterday in the state of Georgia. The state of Virginia has done similar things related to NIL. So all of these types of factors are influencing our world. And we've got to figure out and listen to the messages from the marketplace to figure out where it is we're going to go. So the complexity that you see there on the screen, I would argue, calls for simplicity. And what we need is simplicity of governance. Like I always do, let's go to the 14th century and we'll look at William of Ockham and Occam's razor. And it's a very simple notion, which is the simplest explanation or solution is usually the best one. And right now we need simplicity, we need decentralization, we need clarity of purpose, and we need way less bureaucracy that aligns decision-making authority in the spaces that fit the types of institutions we have. And honestly, a lot of this is based around the conferences. So what you're going to see here on this slide is the suggested framework. And it's very basic. There's questions that need to be asked here. But as I talk, certainly among many of the colleagues that I associate with in the CCA 22, and again, this is not representative of all views, there's three things that come up over and over and over. Our conferences and schools want access to the Division I championships, especially the basketball championship. We need to have consistent playing rules and agree on what those rules are going to look like. And really the playing rules there surround, we can't have 5 basketball players on one team and 4 on another. We all have to play at 10-foot high rims. Those are the types of playing rules I'm talking about. And then the third piece is really preserving the crucial revenue streams that are funding Division I athletics right now at the conference level. The equal conference fund matters. The basketball revenue matters. There's a whole variety of pieces that flowed into this space. And the challenge you've got is that our tendency and our desire is to regulate. It's like a moth to a flame. We continue to want to go and try and control things, honestly, around some well-intended reasons. Could be budget, could be revenue generation, and competitive balance. And the world has changed in such a way that I would argue that the fewer things that are in this circle, and these would be the areas that should be shared across all of Division I, the better. I'm not convinced that anything else needs to belong here. How does that work? How do you pull this together? There's no Division I board. There's no Division I council. The decisions are going to be made at a much lower level. If you think about the federal government, state governments, local governments, pushing these things down to those levels is crucial and important because there are so many different institutions. The A4 institutions have a particular look, largely public state institutions and some elite privates. You get into some of the other conferences, they're largely private. You've got military institutions. You've got all different kinds of missions. And this question of, well, what do we have in common? These are the things that we have in common. And number one on that list for a reason is the Division I championship experience. So how this works, I think the Olympics are incredibly instructive. You think about what happens in the Olympics right now. There's 100 plus countries competing in the summer and winter games, 75 different sports, and they all somehow manage with different NGBs, with different budgets, with different travel arrangements, even with different benefits and shortcomings. If Jamaica wants to have a bobsled team, they can have a bobsled team. We've figured out how to do this. Our conferences do this. We've got all different kinds of approaches, but there's a path to go and compete, and we need to maintain that. And I don't think college athletics has to be a whole lot different in that regard. So that's one side of the equation, is maintaining simplicity on the left side in this circle. Where do you go from there? Where do you deal with eligibility? Where do you deal with health and safety issues, et cetera? I think these should be decided in one of two places. They should either be decided in what we've termed Subdivision A, and for clarity purposes, that's currently the 4 SEC, ACC, Big 10, Big 12. Why are those 4 conferences set aside? They have indicated they want to understand and be able to handle their own situation. You think about the autonomy decisions that were made to give them autonomy, and a lot of decisions, they want more of that. I think there is a recognition that is appropriate and makes sense. And then everybody else has to figure out where they're going to fall in. And who's in Subdivision A, honestly, is going to be dictated by that group, is my suspicion and my expectation. You saw this with the CFP. They were very straightforward as it related to what they thought they wanted that model to look like, and I think they will carry that forward into NCAA governance in some fashion. And it's our responsibility to try and figure out, okay, if that's really what is going to help hold this together, what do we value and what do we want to hold on to, which is really the shared governance of the issues that are in the circle. Subdivision B would be all the other conferences, and I realize there's some challenges out there as to where does the group of 5 conferences fall? Where does a conference like the Big East or the Atlantic 10 fall? Very legitimate and real questions. Not sure that that's something that the association is going to decide in total. I think it's going to be decided by those 4 conferences. So all of these other factors can still be a part of the NCAA. We can still have eligibility rules. We can still have health and safety concerns addressed. There's a variety of things that could be handled there, enforcement, but those could be divided and handled in 2 different groups if you want to keep this within the NCAA. The alternative option, and this one, as I think about it more and more, seems to make a lot of sense, which is 30 different conferences compete in 30 different ways as it relates to their governance. You continue to have a shared approach as it relates to playing rules. We still share revenue. We still have Division I championships where we all meet on the field, but the conferences are representative of institutions that have like-minded approaches, and from an avoidance of antitrust concerns, 30 different decision makers looks a lot different than 4 really well-empowered, well-funded conferences, and then the other 27, 28 making decisions in Subdivision B. So I don't want to belabor the point. Again, the concept here is really simplicity. And then the other concept I would bring in here is freedom. If you look at the actions that we are taking over and over and over, it's one that the institutions want freedom to make their decisions. The conferences want freedom to make decisions. And many of these decisions are revolving around economic concerns that we don't all have to handle the same way. And just because we haven't handled them the same way doesn't mean we can't meet on the field of competition. So I want to stop there, turn the panel over to my colleagues, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Michael. Before I get started, on behalf of my co-chair, Tom Michael, who's the athletic director at Eastern Illinois University, and the working groups that we've been representing now for over 8 or 9 months, I want to thank the Knight Commission, first of all, for your encouragement and these opportunities for us to share our work. You have believed in us from the beginning that we could design a philosophically and legally defensible model of college sports, so thank you so much. The first session today really was very complicated, as we all witnessed. And I want to say, first off, I am not a lawyer. Those were the lawyers, so I'm not going to speak as a lawyer. But I think it's really made what our work come crystal clear. The non-football Division I schools and FCS athletic directors, we've been working through NACTA and started this process now well over a year ago to create a sustainable and defensible model of Division I athletics that will keep our subdivisions competing based on Division I championships and with continued access to shared revenue. Our group recently spent about 8 months developing what we think is a philosophically sound Division I model that we're going to share with you shortly. The details of this model was presented at NACTA to our membership and several times publicly. We recently entered into what we call phase 2 of our project that includes a broader group. At their request, we have included representatives from the National Association of Athletics Compliance Professionals and the National Association of Academic and Student-Athlete Development Professionals, in addition to more athletic directors, commissioners, and of course, student-athletes. I want to mention student-athletes again. In our process, they have been with us from the beginning. We believe that the new model for Division I provides a meaningful platform for student-athletes to influence certain areas of policy that will directly impact their experience. Our model is based on 2 distinguishing factors of intercollegiate athletics. First, athletics is part of a social sector and is not fundamentally a commercial business sector enterprise. We serve a public purpose, a greater good that contributes positively to society. Second, the very core of our intercollegiate athletics is education and not a commercial activity. The student-athlete experience must remain holistically grounded in education. Our working group agrees with Michael that the first step to a new Division I model is to fundamentally change governance. We need to simplify the governance at a national level to allow NCAA to focus more on championships with fair and safe playing rules than on a legal defense. We also agree that those championships will generate revenue, and therefore all of Division I should retain access to shared athletic revenues. We believe that two subdivisions can exist with different philosophical approaches to college sports and still compete for the same Division I championship. It is clear that the current autonomy conferences want and need some level of independence, and we support a separate subdivision where they include other football and possibly non-football playing conferences too. We are dubbing the second group, our group, the Collegiate Premier Subdivision, which will be designed for athletic conferences that commit to an education-based model of college athletics. I'm going to take Michael's concept a little further. Our working group has discussed that beyond the first three issues, which is national championships, fair and safe playing rules, and distribution of revenue, we do believe that the national governance model under the NCAA should include some Division I membership requirements as well as minimum and limited academic and health and safety standards. For example, the academic standard may only include admission and full-time student status at your institution. Additional standards would be the responsibility of each subdivision. Furthermore, each subdivision has the authority or the autonomy to determine which rules category will be governed at the subdivision level, the conference, or the institutional level. We recognize that the NCAA versus House settlement, if approved, would provide us some additional direction regarding roster management, athlete benefits, including revenue sharing and name and image likeness rules, and enforcement for those schools that opt in if they otherwise are not required by law to do so. We recognize that some institutions and conferences that join the Collegiate Premier Subdivision may opt into the settlement model. We do not think that creates problems for this to work. It is our belief that a bifurcated Division I model will help us become more nimble in the current legal environment and will provide the freedom to deliver a holistic educational model of sport. The model developed during phase 1 of our project fits into the new NCAA Division I Collegiate Premier Subdivision. Our working group is starting, by the way, we have a meeting this afternoon, starting to dissect the core elements of the model. And after socializing with our membership, we will recommend which features can be used to shape a new subdivision. But before I get to that, I want to bring up something that you've noticed on the last two slides. You notice it said 10-year plan. The reason that we have included that is the potential House settlement includes a 10-year commitment to pay back damages. That will be the burden of all Division I schools, regardless of whether our student athletes benefit from the payments. We suggest that we consider a 10-year plan where there is no changes to championship access, to shared athletic revenues, including equal conference fund, and that voting on national issues in what we call the big blue box would be voted on by equal representation, meaning there is no weighted voting in that middle box. Each of the three fundamental areas of our Division I model has both a philosophical and legal foundation. We believe at the center of this Venn diagram is a new and defensible model of college sports that centers athletics experience more deeply in education, and it will require institutions to do things differently. We'll go into each of these a little more as we move forward through the next slides. In summary, for athletes to be student, and I'm going to say that again, for athletes to be student athletes, institutional leaders are going to need to focus on three primary things. One, we have to rebalance the level of control over student athletes, and we heard that from Jill earlier about how important that is. We are going to treat them more like other students on campus. Two, create greater clarity, understand, articulate, and measure how student athletes and their institutions benefit from athletic programs. And in some cases, we may have to enhance some student athlete benefits. Three, reframe college athletics through a higher education lens by transforming the college athletic experience into part of the educational mission and academic experience on college campuses. This model, the tools I will show you next, are all related to materials that can be found on the NACDA website. If we execute this well, this new model will provide a holistic and educational experience that becomes the greatest benefit to our student athletes. Our Phase 1 working group included legal experts that used FSLA, NLRB, and case law to identify control measures to assist in creating a tool that will help coaches and staff make sure they're not asserting control over student athletes' time and activities, which is beyond what is essential. This can be defined by treatment of other students across campus who are engaged in programs that also represent the institution. As you heard earlier, Jill was saying play versus work. How much time are you spending? I want to thank Meredith Page, who's sitting to my right, who you'll hear from in a few minutes. Her leadership, she engaged student athletes to help us improve our understanding of what is perceived as appropriate levels of control over student athletes in their time. The scorecard recognizes that some control is essential for the well-being of student athletes and our programs and the institution. The goal is to reduce this unnecessary control of student athletes' time and activities and to preserve the vitality of NCAA intercollegiate athletics. Our next tool is about benefits valuation. NCAA intercollegiate athletics is a human development laboratory. As a former Division I college athlete myself and coach, I know there is great depth to the student-athlete experience, and the personal benefits are extraordinary. Institutions that sponsor Division I athletics because there is great value to our student-athletes and to our institutions. We use a yin and yang model trying to illustrate the synergistic relationship between the benefits the student-athletes receive and the benefits the institution. Our working group developed a benefits valuation tool to help institutions better understand and test their assumptions regarding the various benefits of intercollegiate athletics and to identify areas where we might have to enhance the student-athlete benefits at our institutions at the conference or national level. The student-athlete benefits are found on the left of the model and the institution on the right. A third category we call integrated benefits because they are generally reciprocal. For example, as we grow our fan support, that is good for the student-athlete experience and may improve the environment to support student-athlete success. Even name, image, and likeness opportunities might increase. Depending upon the sport, that increases the visibility of our institutions also. On the NACDA website, we provide much greater detail as well as sample data that can be used to describe the value of certain student-athlete and institutional benefits. Each institution and conference should assess its unique benefits based on specific data. Meredith and Anthony took this model to their peers and helped collect very important input for us. The next part is really one of the key parts of our model, and it is once again foundational and requires some change for all of us. We want to directly link the student-athlete's experience with educational outcomes, and this is critical for building a new model for college athletics that grounds the athlete as a student. Thanks to the Knight Commission's sponsorship, we engaged 4 experts to help us build out this concept, and their individual papers are available on the NACDA website. Data shows there's inherent academic value in the student-athlete's experience. For example, student-athletes learn and hone their ability to work in teams, effectively communicate. They must be adaptable, resilient, and continuously improve to reach their performance outcomes. Creating clear learning outcomes is a starting point for student-athlete activities to be understood, measured, and studied as part of education. With increasingly greater institutional support, this slide depicts a scale of potential academic pathways that will create a more meaningful connection between athletics and educational outcomes that have previously been just incidental to performance. At the far left, you can see an athletic department could act either independently or collaboratively with faculty to develop measuring to develop and measuring learning outcomes. For example, each sport could have different learning outcomes. Your athletic department could have those. As you move along the spectrum to the right, the academic program becomes more vigorous. And to the very far right, athletic participation would be transformed into a formalized academic field comparable to music or performing arts. Each stop on this academic pathway would enhance the benefits to the student athletes academically and further empower them athletically. In each scenario, student athletes retain the right to select their major and related coursework. And as with all areas of academia, institutions have full autonomy to develop learning outcomes and offer curricula. While the athletics department could articulate and measure learning outcomes, the beginning point in the academic pathway, advancing a sports-centric curriculum lies in the integration of athletic programs with their institutions. Of course, coaches and administrators play a significant role as educators in this model. And many of us who are now athletic directors or coaches, that's why we got into this business in the first place. We are actually teachers and educators. We might require having some additional credentials or training in order to make sure that we're doing what we said we're going to do with learning outcomes. It is also important to note that Division I is the highest level of competitive college sports, so our model involves an integration of a holistic high-performance approach. To wrap up my comments, our working groups and many representatives of our membership believe that we are onto something that is philosophically defensible and will provide us a stronger legal foothold. We look forward to your questions and comments that continue to help shape our recommendations as we continue to work on this model. Now it is my utmost pleasure to turn the conversation over to two student athletes who have volunteered so much of their time and their talents over the last year and a half. They continue to work tirelessly to help shape what we're sharing with you today. And our working group, once again, strongly believes by providing student athletes with a meaningful voice and an avenue to affect change related to their experience is critical to the future of Division I athletics. So I'll turn it over to Anthony and Meredith.
Thank you, Janet, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you guys for the opportunity for us to be able to speak in front of you today. You'll have to forgive me if I get a little bit emotional as I'm up here. This is the first fall football season that I'm not playing. It's a little emotional. No, I'm just playing. I'm living my best life. I'm eating too much food and all that. Meredith and I do look forward to speaking with you guys on many topics that we are passionate about. And I want to first note that we are not here speaking for any official group, but from our own personal experiences, but also in conjunction with a lot of the work we've been doing with our student athlete peers. Student athletes are the core of college athletics, as you guys are well aware. We are the glue that binds everything in college sports. We glue the biggest institutions with the smallest ones, the Alabamas with the Abilene Christians. We are the common ground. And the common goal between us is this: to inspire, lead, and create a transformational experience for the futures of young men and young women. And it's evident that the structure in which we operate is under attack from external forces, as we've talked about, with different motives and agendas. And even now, third parties are creating entities to organize the student athlete voice. Yet, as we know, student athletes are not employees and should not be deemed employees, and therefore, in the legal sense at least, cannot unionize. The sustainability of student athletes, coaches, administrators working together for the common ground and that common goal is being threatened. I've had the opportunity personally to advocate for employment protection and other student athletes' rights in front of over 70 congressional representatives in their offices, ranging from staff briefings, Zoom calls, in-person meetings on the Capitol with key congressional leaders like the staffs of Senator Blumenthal, Senator Sanders, and Senator Booker. One thing I believe is paramount to moving forward with a sustainable model for college sports is creating an influential governance body within the structure that is interwoven with student athlete influence. First, we would like to emphasize the importance of enhancing the representation and influence of student athletes within our conference decision-making structures. Elevating the voice of student athletes at the conference level is critical to creating a sustainable model of governance that will last. No matter what the makeup of the new Division I governance structure ends up looking like, the conferences will still be conferences, and they will still have their own structures of governance. And the truth is, no one really understands the student athlete experience better than those who live it every day, student athletes themselves. We already see student athletes voting on the highest committees of governance at the Division I level, and across the entire association. You have student athletes that have a voting seat on the board of governors, the board of directors for Division I council, and on most of the major subcommittees within the Division I membership. The thought is, if we're trusted to make decisions and help impact decisions that affect the entire Division I membership, don't even make sense that we have the same weight of influence at the conference level within our leagues. I liken it to being able to vote on federal law. For example, myself being a voting member on Division I SAC, but not being able to vote on state law, not having a vote at the conference level. There's nothing more specific to the student athlete experience than what happens at their institutions and their conferences. So creating an opportunity for student athletes to have influence on and vote on conference specific issues that directly affect their experience is something we are standing here and earnestly advocating for. We, the student athletes, believe that we should have a direct role in shaping our experiences, and that role can be provided by you guys within the system at every level of governance. Division I SAC is currently in the process of creating a formal proposal and treating the Division I conference commissioners to provide student athletes this opportunity specifically. Every conference has a national representative that represents and in many cases votes for the conference at the national level. And the basis of our proposal is to provide that student athlete that is the national representative or one at the conference's discretion with a vote at the highest governance level within their league. As I pass it off to Meredith, I want to intentionally take the time to ask the Knight Commission to consider endorsing that conference voting proposal.
Good morning, everyone. And it's a true honor to be in front of you today. And I just want to thank everyone for everything that you do for student athletes and what you're doing for college athletics. My name is Meredith Page, and I'm currently in my senior year, preparing to graduate this May, and in the middle of my final volleyball season. Why am I here, and how could I make the time? More importantly, why did I make the time? Because it matters. Because every bylaw that is made, every proposal that is considered, and every piece of litigation against the NCAA directly affects my teammates, my school, my conference, and every one of the 500,000 student athletes across the country. We need to reflect on what happened and start deciding what we're going to do about it. While change is scary, we are where we are. It is our responsibility to learn and consequently reimagine a governing structure that is stronger and better than ever. We are at a turning point. We either can turn away from the student athlete or embrace what they have to offer, their expertise on their experience. I challenge you all to ponder, what if and why? I wonder what would be different today if Ralph Johnson was educated from unbiased counsel on the ramifications of employment status, the detrimental effects that this will leave on non-revenue generating sports, similar to his own, international student athletes, women's athletics, and so on. Would he still have chosen to sue the NCAA? What if Ralph Johnson had a systematic avenue to resolve his conflicts and mediate his concerns? I speculate that it could have made a difference. I wonder what would be different today if Grant House had trust and transparency. If he felt like he could have voiced his concerns and been heard at the very beginning, not at the end, where he could have negotiated in-house. What if Grant House had a systematic avenue to resolve his conflicts and mediate his concerns? I speculate that the next 10 years could have looked different. I wish I had all the answers, and I'm sure you do too. But what I do know is that we can't go on like this any longer, wondering, pondering, questioning the past decisions. We need to centralize NCAA governance around the student-athlete experience. having them seriously involved at every single level by providing student athletes with a systematic avenue to mediate and resolve their conflicts. After all, they're the ones that feel the impact the most, from the most minute changes to the most overarching bylaws. We feel it. No matter if they have the endless resources or if they're trying desperately to have enough, they are still young, impressionable people that deserve to be in an environment that has their best interest at heart. We need to strive to have the student-athlete voice at every level, national, conference, and institutional. Whether their voice is literally in the room or figuratively, they are what unites us all, and their success is our success. They are the glue. During our time of change, Division I SAC recognizes that this is also our moment to evolve. To investigate how to elevate student-athlete voices, Division I SAC created the Student-Athlete Future Engagement Working Group, coined as SAFE. This group is made up of the Division I SAC Executive Board and 4 other Division I SAC representatives, and we took on the challenge of creating a system of student-athlete governance that can be implemented into any silo or subdivisional model. First and foremost, our proposal demands the continuation of a national Division I SAC, where we will be a committee of 1 student-athlete per Division I conference, where we will speak on the nuances of the student-athlete experience that we all share. For example, our academic pursuits, our mental and physical well-being, and our holistic development. Division I SAC would be an active participant in disputes and legislation and matters that affect the entirety of Division I athletics. We said this before, student athletes are the best one to educate on their experience. Now, I'll turn it over to Anthony to talk about our proposed SAAPCs.
Thanks, Meredith. We recognize that the Division I's governance structure is going to change, and that there will likely be different subdivisions or silos of governance within Division I. Something that we've kind of tried to work on is a proposed idea of what we've coined the Student-Athlete Policy Committees, or SAPC. Pretty much the idea is that it will be a group made up of student athletes from that subdivision's demographic. These policy committees would serve to directly address unique experiences and challenges faced by student athletes specific to that silo or subdivision that they compete in. For example, this is completely hypothetical. If there's an entire subdivision made up of only institutions that field FCS football, well, that student-athlete policy committee would be a small committee of FCS football players that can give direct feedback to their subdivision's governance, as well as serve on any subcommittee that is needed within that subdivision. The model is built to be able to be implemented in whatever the future governance looks like, and be able to have student athletes within that subdivision and within that subdivision's governance. The idea is to keep a unified group of student athletes at the national level, like Meredith mentioned, while creating a more detailed and specific group of student athletes for whatever subdivision they are governed under. Student athletes are ready to be involved in the association and want to be met with transparency, feel heard, given more opportunities for involvement, and a sustainable seat at the table.
Anthony and I have been involved in the creation of the models that have been presented to you today, and surely will be a part of models going forward. We have just a few things to ask of you. To recognize that external unionization organizations are a threat to college athletics and the opportunities of hundreds and thousands of young people. To recognize that student athletes are not employees. To provide or advocate to your colleagues that student athletes deserve a voice and a vote on the highest level of governance in each conference. To start asking yourself, what if? To remember that student athletes are people. To rehumanize student athletes and rehumanize the NCAA. We're not a stat in the transfer portal, and we're not a new headline about NIL, and we're not someone that just makes money. And finally, to remember that student athletes unite us all. We thank you greatly for your time, and we look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Anthony and Meredith. I think that at this point, President John Alger is going to provide a presidential perspective and offer some remarks on what we've heard this morning.
Thank you, Pam, and a special thanks to our panelists, especially for offering solutions and a path forward to some of the very complicated questions we've been considering today. And just for context, American University is a proud member of Division I and the Patriot League, and I previously served for 12 years as president of James Madison University, which is also a Division I member. So Commissioner Cross asked the core question of how national governance might be simplified so that Division I athletics can become more legally defensible and to allow for Division I conferences to have differing philosophical approaches to college sports. The approach suggested would allow for those conferences with a stronger educational focus for intercollegiate athletics, such as the Patriot League, to make decisions that are independent from and with less influence, perhaps, from those which might have a more commercial focus. The purpose of the Knight Commission, of course, is to promote transformational change that prioritizes the education, health, safety, and success of college athletes. I want to commend the efforts of the D1 AAA and FCS Athletics Directors Associations for their work to emphasize the primacy of education in the college sports model and to take action to increase benefits to student athletes through education. Within that context, the model presented by Janet Cohn aligns with specific Knight Commission initiatives. I want to highlight the focus on the education-centric model of college sports that would include measuring the learning outcomes achieved by athletes through their participation in college sports. These participation outcomes are also reasons that employers love to hire college athletes. Outcomes like teamwork, leadership, communications, problem solving and conflict resolution, grit and resilience, time management, and work ethic and discipline to set and achieve goals. Data tells us that athletics participation builds these skills and qualities that we know are critical for success in careers and in life. In other words, there can be profound educational benefits that stem from athletics, and athletics therefore can play an important part in our educational mission. Ancient philosophers understood this connection as part of a holistic approach to education, recognizing that athletics could strengthen different forms of intelligence and develop character. And more recently, of course, colleges and universities are talking a lot about health and wellness as part of a holistic educational experience. I would add one more skill to this list: learning to engage in civil discourse and to work in diverse environments across differences. By teaching how to compete within certain rules of engagement and to respect your opponents, athletics participation can enhance bridge building skills that are desperately needed in society today. Furthermore, as we heard, athletic competition can be a unifying force, bringing people together in community across all sorts of societal divides. One of the major trends in higher education in recent years has been to identify and measure what we call high-impact learning practices that develop these skills and attributes. We're getting much better at assessing the associated learning outcomes, and we have a growing base of research on the educational value of intercollegiate athletics in particular. So just as we've done with the arts, music, and dance, with an appropriate level of attention and focus, I'm confident that we can do even more to articulate and assess the educational benefits of high-level athletics participation. It's a bit discouraging, therefore, that in a recent legal case, the plaintiffs argued that athletics participation actually impedes rather than enriches the academic experience of college athletes. While certainly some change is needed around the control of athlete time and activities, as Janet outlined, this new standard of connecting the athletics experience directly to educational outcomes would help athletes better understand the long-term benefits they are receiving. And additionally, I agree that a key to this education-centric model is to require a credentialing process for coaches. We must explicitly recognize the role of coaches as educators and give them the tools they need to serve effectively as teachers and mentors. This proposed model also adopts the principle of financial responsibility that's outlined in the Commission's CARE Model report. The CARE model is an acronym for Connecting Athletics Revenue with the Educational Model of College Sports. The financial responsibility standards demonstrate how athletics revenues directly benefit athletes and are not used simply to benefit coaches, administrators, and institutions. I also want to thank Meredith and Anthony for thoughtfully presenting the importance of including a stronger student-athlete voice in the governance process and for providing a clear plan on how that might happen. As educators, we must hear directly from student-athletes about their actual lived experiences. This will allow us to work together on policies and practices that help student-athletes overcome barriers and reach their full potential. By sharing their perspectives and insights, student-athletes will also develop a sense of agency that is crucial for making positive change on issues about which they are passionate. As a university president, I have benefited enormously from hearing directly from student-athletes about how their athletic training and experiences have translated into valuable life lessons and personal growth. Properly understood and managed, athletics and education can and should go hand in hand. It is our job as college and university leaders to reclaim this vital connection to our educational mission. Thank you for the opportunity to share these thoughts today.
Thank you so much, John. Really great comments. And thanks to all members of the panel for your very interesting and I think provocative comments here today. What we're going to do now is that we're going to move into a question and answer period. And I'd like to welcome Jill Bodenstein. Jill, we've corralled you again to sort of sneak back in so that you can be part of this question and answer period. So thank you for doing that. And so let's go ahead and start with our question and answer period. And I guess the first question, Kendall, go ahead and let's lead off. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Pam. And I just want to thank each and every one of you guys for being here today. Anthony and Meredith, as a former SAC chair and board member, it is incredibly encouraging to see student athletes continue the tradition of advocacy, especially in these uncertain times. So keep up the great work, and we're going to continue to support you best we can. This one's for Mr. Cross. There's no confusion on the fact that there's been a significant arms race in college sports for the past few decades. You talk a lot about, a potentially new governance structure. We'd love to hear more about how that governance structure would impact the current arms race. And then under that umbrella, given these differences, do you expect all, 350 plus Division I institutions to continue to compete with one another athletically under the same umbrella?
Appreciate the question. So I think I'd say a couple things about the simplified model that you saw initially. One, it's not intended to address the arms race. It's intended to allow us to operate in a competitive environment that lets us show up on the playing field. And honestly, there's March Madness is a cultural phenomenon. The opportunity that comes from that championship, and honestly, all of the NCAA championships, they do an incredible job of running good championships, is something that athletes want to continue to be a part of and be a part of that Division I umbrella and experience. The arms race is really a proxy for people suggesting that those with the largest budgets should be granted the opportunity to win and not be challenged on the field. And if it was all about the largest budget, we could skip the games and just line up the budgets on the sheet of paper and go, well, here's the number one budget. That's who's going to carry the day for us. And we could go to DraftKings or FanDuel, figure out what the markets say on the point spread, and we could decide that way too. So there's a rationale for needing to compete. And look, you can go back to last Saturday when Northern Illinois beats Notre Dame. I'll use an example from the Southern Conference. Wofford volleyball beats number 16 Tennessee on Monday, and you've got to prove it on the court. And there's a correlation without question, but it is not a guarantee that you will be successful. There's different methods, there's different philosophies, culture matters, team dynamic matters, injuries happen, mental capacity, stress home, road. There's all these different factors that come into this that just suggest we don't need to abandon this just because some people make a lot more revenue than some other places do. As it relates to the 350 Division I institutions continuing to compete under the same umbrella, that's the intention behind this, is to maintain that while recognizing that there are legitimate concerns across all 32 Division I conferences, either at the top financially, who say we're being constrained by others who don't have the same resources, or the people who don't have as many resources feel like they're being dragged along trying to maintain competitiveness. And the automatic qualifier system does an incredible job of allowing different paths that align with institutional philosophies. And I think maintaining that does allow us to stay under the same Division I umbrella in a way that could help the arms race issues as people start to understand what their path is. Is it an AQ? If you're in a conference that's going to get 6, 7, 8 NCAA bids, your model might look different and you might spend differently. So anyway, hopefully that's responsive to your question. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Michael. So I think we have Amy. You have a question for Janet?
I do. Thanks, Pam. Janet, great to see you. Appreciate the progress made from the working group since the last time you presented to the commission. It's wonderful to see the refined model as you've continued your dialogue and receive feedback. The FCS and other subdivision that you represent a majority of the Division I institutions. So while I suspect and can assume that you're speaking on behalf of a majority of those two subdivisions, I also suspect that there are some outliers. So I think it'd be interesting to hear any feedback from those groups, and then also curious what input or feedback you received, if any, from the FBS conferences, particularly the autonomy group.
Thank you, Amy. Great seeing you also. Boy, that's a great question, because since we've been working on this, when we first started, there was a small core group of us. It was sort of like, can we do anything? Is there any way we can get involved? What's the best mechanism to do this? And then as the years go by, and now heading into the second year, the momentum has grown. And, we've done everything from having small working groups to webinars to in-person. We've talked to our different athletic directors, different commissioners have presented at their conference meetings. So this has been an evolving process. It's really been interesting to watch how some started as, there's nothing we can do, let's just wait until somebody else tells us what to do. And then as each week goes by and there's some new lawsuit or something, more and more people have gotten involved. And the model you saw today is not the model we had at our working group last Wednesday, by the way, because every time we meet, invariably somebody brings up something, there's a question, or they went back to some of their colleagues, and that thing will evolve. And actually, a lot of our work gets done on weekends based off of feedback that we're getting from our colleagues and from student athletes, and now the conference, our compliance friends and the conferences. So I also think there's something I want to point out. We're getting feedback from our colleagues at the NCAA, because remember, the NCAA is us. I mean, that is really important to keep in mind. And, we agree that one of the things that we have gotten a lot of feedback is, can we simplify? Can we simplify? And Michael's kind of stressed that too, that, we have got to simplify so that we have some way to go forward. The other thing that has become pretty obvious over the last couple of months, we don't know, as our colleague said earlier, whatever today is, well, we leave here and something else has happened. We think our model, regardless, we all stay together, which is our hope, because we believe in the NCAA and the association. We realize some people need more independence because of what they're doing. Others need different kind of independence. We believe no matter what happens, there will be a model for a lot of us to be involved in that really will bring, as was just mentioned, that we're still part of the academic institution, and that's the most important thing, to provide these experiences to student athletes. So it may change tomorrow when we leave this meeting, because I'm sure you're going to have some feedback. And so our model is pretty nimble. And the second part of your question, how we're involving our other colleagues, maybe at the bigger schools, or, some of them have been in our meetings. They sign up for the webinars. They provide us feedback. Most recently, a couple compliance and governance gurus have been working with us because, we'll take feedback from any institution, any conference, any athletic director, anyone that's involved, because we all care about this. We think this is very, very important. And we actually hold our own future in our own hands, contrary to popular belief. It's still time for us to make a big difference. I hope that answered your question.
Thank you, Janet. Charles?
Thank you all for being here today. It's really enlightening discussion. Anthony, congratulations on completing your athletic career in college. And Meredith, as an in-season athlete, to take the time to be here really says how important this is to you. And we appreciate you sharing your perspectives. For you, Meredith, what are your thoughts on the model that's been proposed here today? And then do you think that other student athletes will see this model as the answer to preserving Division I sports, and that they'd prefer that to being deemed employees?
Thank you so much for your question. To hit on the first part in regards to how I feel about the models that have been presented today, I want to first hit on my experience. So, as it's been alluded to, I'm in my final season of collegiate volleyball, and I will put my shoes away for the first time in 10 years. But the experiences and what I've learned and what those volleyball shoes have brought me in education, the amount that has been poured into me by my athletic department will carry me a lifetime. That's what we need to protect. We need to protect the educative nature of collegiate athletics. And I think that this model does that. I think that when we focus on the educational development, when we think about learning outcomes, when we think about how are we going to protect the feasibility of collegiate sports, that this can be an answer. Every single student athlete that I have ever spoken to till this day does not want to be an employee. And if they started off saying, maybe I want to be an employee, I'd like to get paid, the minute I bring in taxes, complexities, workers' comp, any of those things that we don't really want to think about, they go, oh, absolutely not. I do not want to be an employee anymore. So it's about educating them on the fact of how much more goes into employment status. So I do not believe that student athletes want to be employees. And if they think they do, I'm interested to know why they think they do. Because at the end of the day, we value being able to put our academics first. We value the personal development that we gain through the athletic experience. So I don't know if this is the complete answer. As Janet has alluded to, we're always working. But I do think that this is the start that we need to completely change our mindset in collegiate athletics and bring it back to what it's actually about.
Anthony, both you and Meredith have shared a compelling argument that more college athlete engagement and governance is key to help avoiding being labeled employees. But are there other reasons that athletes should are there other reasons that athletes deserve to have more say in governance and the process of governance? And what do you think might look different about college sports if athletes had a greater voice?
Thank you for that question. I would like to answer it like this. So we had a day on the Capitol where a handful of student athletes went to the Capitol and had an entire 8-hour day meeting with congressional representatives, senators, and their staffs. I would say probably the biggest takeaway that I got from that day, especially speaking with certain congressional reps on that err on the side of unionization and employment status, was what is being done to give you the rights that you deserve? What is being done to give you a voice that actually can make something happen or make something change within the structure as it is now? Specifically, one of them asked, can you negotiate a water break? Like, what if you're not getting enough water breaks? And we kind of like chuckled at each other, like the athletes in the root of the question is, can you negotiate a water break? Can you ask for more quote unquote rights or whatever the case is? So I think specifically talking about employment status, it's about creating something within that gives us the ability to influence our experiences. And that is why it matters that we're in the central part of the governance structure, because we are, again, like I alluded to, the glue. I mean, no matter what division, subdivision, conference, whatever, student athletes, we want to be students and we want to be athletes. We want to compete. We want to compete in our institutions, our leagues, and in Division I specifically. And so preserving that comes from giving us something that we can have in-house, protected by us, not meddled with by outside forces and influences. I also want to say this. I'm going to probably get fact checked on this, but I think it's 2015. The autonomy conferences actually voted legislation to give 3 student athletes from each conference a vote at the autonomy level. That's almost 19% of the votes being put on student athletes. This, again, fact check me, but this ended up, diving off, but it actually passed through legislation. So, and this is the autonomy conferences. So going from that to now where we are in the governance structure doesn't look like we're making progress, although things have changed and there needs to be an enhancement of that. And so I'm emphasizing that to say that we're not like asking for something abnormal, or this is not something weird or, never been done before, never been thought of before. We're saying, hey, we think a part of the solution, not the entire solution. Again, we are not experts. We don't think we are. A part of the solution is, let us be in the beginning. Let us be on the front end and not on the back end. Let us be in the middle and not on the outside.
I also like to quickly add, and just specifically hitting on the part of the question, is what other reasons are there for student athletes to have more say in the governance process? I'm very well aware that I get to be in some really awesome rooms, and I get to hear a lot of things that student athletes at the campus level don't always get to hear. And for me, that builds a lot of trust and transparency. I think that we need to build that trust and transparency all the way down to the institutional level. When you're invested in the system, when you know the system, whenever you're respected within the system, I believe it'll be a whole lot harder to attack the system at the end of the day.
John? Yeah.
Thank you. So building on what we've just heard, turning back to Janet and Michael for a moment, Meredith and Anthony have talked about the need for a national focus on academic and health and safety standards. And I'm wondering if you can tell us a bit more about how you'd see these important sort of core student athlete issues being governed in the bifurcated model in Division I that you described.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think this is an area where reasonable minds can disagree. I want to start with that. I look at questions of eligibility and health and safety. And if you think back to the model that was up there with the circle, and there's 3 things in that circle: championships, playing rules, revenue distribution. The question becomes, do you put those 2 areas that you've mentioned, health and safety and eligibility, into that circle, into the area that's decided across the entire association? And there's some very practical reasons why I think that has to be assessed and understood more clearly. I believe that we should have full-time students playing collegiate athletics. Let me lead with that premise. But beyond that, we don't have an approach right now nationally where we say we should all adopt Harvard's academic standards in order to determine whether or not you're eligible. We don't go to the other end of the academic spectrum and say, hey, let's use those standards. We let institutions decide those things. There's systems in place related to providing rewards around student athlete graduation rates. There's academic units that are provided to the institution. So there's a variety of mechanisms in place that I think allow us to do the types of things on a carrot approach as opposed to a stick approach, number one. And then number 2, you get into this dynamic where if you put those things into that circle, if I'm in one of the Autonomy 4 conferences, I don't want to have some of the things I'd like to be put in place around health and safety standards to be prevented from occurring because of cost concerns. And we had a conversation about the arms race. So I think that dynamic exists. And then simultaneously, you can never be too safe. You can never be too healthy. The autonomy forum might say we have to have 4 athletic trainers at our golf championships. That may not make sense for some other places. Doesn't mean it's not safe. It's just a different way of approaching it. So the more things you put into that circle, that's a shared governance approach, the more complicated it gets. Letting the 2 subdivisions work on that. If there's 2, if there's 3, let them figure it out. Or at the conference level, push those to be conference level concerns and let them try and navigate it.
Yeah, that's a great answer. That's one of the things that has changed on our model a couple times, to be honest with you. I think we're all in agreement, though. We've made great strides on graduation rates. We do not want to go backwards. We want to, if we're in education as part of your academic institution, there probably are going to be some minimums. And so I think that's going to kind of be fleshed out as we keep working forward. I also want to say, we've made great strides on increasing some of the benefits that we've given the student athletes in areas of mental health and other things through the NCAA. We don't want those to go away. But we also want institutions and conferences to have some autonomy if they want to do more, or solve it by using institutional resources instead of going out and hiring different people. But I think that's going to be a part that we're going to see develop a little more over the next month or so as we continue to work on our model. But simplify in the middle box has to be simplified so that we can move forward.
Shantayon?
Thank you. Yes, first I'd like to say thank you all for being here. I'll echo what Kendall said earlier. As someone who was on National SAC, it's always great to see student athletes using their voice. And then I also saw Kendall on the slide. I'd almost forgotten what young Kendall looked like with no fro, so thank you for that. My question is for the student athletes. Both of you have been significantly involved. You mentioned, speaking in front of Congress and testifying in legal cases, serving at your conference, Student-Athlete Advisory Committees, and now on National SAC. Both of you were doing this while earning your degrees and playing, obviously, and competing in your sport. For student athletes to fully engage in the governance process, it is a big commitment, as you know. Do you think student athletes are willing to dedicate the time it takes to serve and make a meaningful impact?
Yeah, I think that's a valid question. I'll answer. Well, I'll give 2 points, and then I'll let Meredith share her thoughts. I think, again, going back to what I just mentioned, this is not something new. This is not something we're trying to sit up here and create now. Again, I don't fact check this, but I don't know, 10 years almost where student athletes have been at, the highest levels of governance within the NCAA for Division I membership. So this is not something new that we're trying to invent. This is something that has been going. We're just asking for progress, continued progress, because we have made a lot. And then the second thing I would say is, I sit on Division I Council, and that's made up of commissioners, senior administrators, ADs, board of directors, made up of presidents and whatnot. That's not their full-time job. They have other things. They're obviously running leagues, institutions, and different things like that. So I think those things are possible when there's a desire for it. I would also say with Division I SAC specifically, there's an application process for that. It's actually very competitive. We, being on the executive team this year, we've had to turn away, I don't know, at least 50 student athletes away from being able to represent their conferences just because there's only one spot. And there's eager desire for student athletes to get in and to actually be a part of the conversation. And we're actually working on more avenues to get more student athletes involved, even if it's not in an official capacity. But the desire is there. I don't think that's the problem. I think the problem is, how do we organize the desire into a sustainable model?
Thank you so much for your question. I just want to echo a lot of Anthony's thoughts. I feel very similarly on this. Like you said, I believe that we're all in this room because it matters. This isn't everyone's full-time job. My full-time job basically is to be a student, and then luckily I get to compete in volleyball as well. So I think that you make time for what matters. the development of young people, 18 to 24-year-olds, sometimes 25, 26 these days. It matters. It absolutely matters because those are the people going into our society. Those are your next CEOs. Those are your next ADs, whoever it may be. So giving them opportunities to lead, like Anthony said, people are wanting to. They are absolutely wanting to. We say no to amazing candidates all the time. And we want to make sure that there's more opportunities to get these student athletes in the national process and at the conference level and at the institutional level, because the want and desire is there. They want to be a part of the reason why they get 24 hours after a travel trip to rest. They want to be a part of why they have 20 hours of Kira a week. They want to be part of these decisions because we feel every change every single day. Thank you.
So, Judy, could I ask you to take the next question? Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks for your ideas. I think this is a moment where we do have to be very creative and bold in being willing to test and experiment with new things. I'm from Quinnipiac University, a mid-major Division I institution. You've talked about, and this is probably for Michael and Janet in terms of the structural issues, you've talked about how you think the structure of Division I should be reshaped and reformed. The question is, does it solve some of the macro issues that the NCAA is contending with now regularly, and that is antitrust, labor-related litigation? I won't throw in Title IX because in a sense that's a school-level issue. But those bigger issues beyond whether we can still preserve the whole purpose of collegiate competitions. So talk about solving some of these other very intractable issues that are really stymieing us.
I'll jump on that one. If you remember our diagram, the Venn diagram, purposely we have the three circles, and one is control of student athletes' time, and Jill might want to chime in on this. To treat our student athletes more like students, all our students are, and not monopolizing all their time constantly so that they have other opportunities. I think that's one part of this when you're starting to ask those questions. Is it play or is it work? How much of their time? So that's one part. I also really believe tying this back into the educational, holistic approach is very important, that we are recentering college athletics back on what it really originally started for. By the way, we got two good examples right now sitting here. Talk about holistic education. How many of us would have liked to have the experience that they're having about governance? All the things. We just haven't measured those or put them in learning outcomes like academic classrooms do, but this is a learning outcome sitting right beside me. So I think that we're going to be able to deal with some of those issues by focusing on those three things that we've got in our Venn diagram. It won't solve all of them, but it certainly will. I don't know, Jill, you want to talk about that? Jill has a little more expertise.
I don't know about expertise, but Jana, just really echoing what you said, I don't know that this is the great answer to any pending litigation or any pending, I think a lot of that's too far down the road. And so I love what Janet said is let's recenter on what's the right way to do this. And I think one of the benefits would be that, for many institutions, it would help us get closer when you look at the 4 factors of the Johnson test, for example, to say, we can really articulate now. We can address in very real and tangible ways that educational benefit and who's necessarily and primarily benefiting and who's got the control. I think it just when you think about it, I think Gabe said really beautifully, just because athletes at your institution can unionize doesn't mean that they will. And we've talked a lot here today about formal involvement of student athletes. Really implore athletic directors and coaches to look at how informally do your student athletes have a voice. And, if my student athletes are troubled by turf because they think it's a health and safety issue, they come to me and we talk about turf versus grass. They get to weigh in. They get to, we had went out to bid for Nike, Under Armour, or Adidas. I'm not wearing them. What do you all think? And so, I think there's a lot of lessons we can learn from this that have legal implications, but I don't think anyone's saying adopt this model and it's going to be all, group hug and the current litigation and other items will go away.
So that speaks to the labor relations aspect of it. The antitrust might be somewhat different.
Yeah, I'm happy to try and speak to that, and others should as well. It's a very interesting question, the antitrust piece, because the reason we're in the situation we are, at least in part, I believe, is because of the bureaucracy that we showed earlier in this session. If you think about the complexity of trying to do the things and navigate through that system, there's been people who have been involved in things, for example, like NIL, and there were lots of working groups, lots of approaches to try and get to a stage where NIL would be permissible under certain circumstances. It didn't get where it needed to get, and we are now dealing with all of the ramifications that come from that. So the antitrust piece really comes down to understanding, okay, bureaucracy is expensive. It was expensive on the legal side. It's expensive on a staff side. And trying to figure out how do you get out of the space where this large 360 some institution organization is dictating the terms of engagement related to all of the types of compensation things that we're seeing out there right now. It's really interesting and notable. College football playoff runs an incredibly successful championship. They never seem to get mentioned in lawsuits. They never seem to be a plaintiff. And there's a reason for that. They haven't inserted themselves into governance. The NCAA has absorbed that burden. And the extent to which the NCAA, we being the 360 some institutions, figure out how to break that logjam of we all have to operate in the same manner. And I go back to the simplicity piece. Stay with the championships, stay with revenue distribution, understand that we're all going to compete with the same rules, and push those issues to conference levels, I think allows us to navigate these questions. It does not bother me as an individual. This is not the Southern Conference's position, but if we get into a situation where we are competing against quasi-employees, which is largely what's happening with collectives and some of the things that are going on, I still want to play against them. That doesn't bother me. It may bother some, but that shouldn't prevent us from competing. And if it helps us avoid all of the very, very expensive antitrust situations that we're facing, I'd suggest that would be a good improvement upon where we currently are.
I want to make one more comment about that too, if I may. Our working group since the beginning has always felt like our conferences were going to be very important and part of the solution, and also individual institutions being courageous enough to say, we're just not going to do that. This is what we're going to do. So I think that's the other piece about the antitrust. That's where you're not making decisions as a whole collective group, but just simplifying it can help this matter.
So we're shortly running out of time, but we do have, I know, 2 more questions. And let me start, Derek, with you, and then maybe we can move it along and get one more in after Derek's. Thank you.
Thanks. And this question is for Janet. You've stated a couple times that providing a holistic educational experience is the greatest benefit to the student athletes, which I agree with. Can you expand on this a little? How do you see the greater focus on the educational value of sports setting athletes up for success post-graduation?
I'll probably say it one more time. There's several, not only these 2 student athletes to my right, but others of you that have been student athletes, and you're probably where you are today because of these outcomes that we're not tracking, but the holistic education you got, not just how to play your sport and the skill set for that, but those kind of skills that have helped you be successful in your career, along with, let's don't forget all the great things we learned about taking care of ourselves, health and wellness that you mentioned earlier, this holistic approach, the people that you meet, the situations that you get to travel, all those things literally holistically are making our student athletes better individuals. Not 100%, but 99% of them are because of that experience. And then finally, I want to remind everybody, the majority of our student athletes that are in our institutions right now are not going to be playing professional sports. So we're setting them up for career success in whatever they want to do. I asked Anthony earlier, how's his real job going now that he's out of football, and he's loving it. But he's using those skills he learned in the football setting. And I'm telling you right now, if somebody needs to hire Meredith before, she's going to be graduating, that'd be a great hire. But, those are the things I think our model can get back to, that where we're actually helping our student athletes get set up for career success. And yes, do we hope someone play for professional sports? Absolutely. If that's their dream, we want to help them, because we are high performance. We're the highest level of competition. And I hate to say, we haven't mentioned the importance of what we do to the Olympics. Don't forget, what we do is very important to our Olympics program too. So I think there's a way forward, and we're getting a little closer. We're probably gonna have to move a little faster, but we're getting there. And I do believe this holistic approach for the student athlete is very important.
Thank you, Janet. And I think we have time for one more question. Beth, thank you.
What you're doing is critical to the Olympic pipeline. So thank you for that. And Meredith and Anthony, thank you for the time that you have to exercise your voice and to make such an impact. If the NCAA does not welcome your proposal to have a more student athlete voice in the governance process and to be on the front end rather than the back end, what are you envisioning will be your next steps?
Well, I would see it as, when you say NCAA, I see that as you guys, Michael, the commissioners, the ADs, you guys are the NCAA, you guys are the membership that can actually make things happen. I am optimistic, though, that the people that are leaders in college sports care about what we're talking about and care about student athletes. I don't think you get in this profession if you don't. And so I have an optimistic view that we're all wanting the same things. We're all wanting to have a transformational experience. We're all wanting to, develop ourselves on the field, off the field. There's nothing that we're misaligned with. So I have optimism that, whatever that looks like will come to be, but it's just about getting there.
Thank you so much for your question. I just want to hit on the fact that we get to be in some really cool rooms as student athletes, and we definitely recognize this. And in these rooms, we're met with trust. So as of now, I'm super optimistic of the NCAA, listening to our proposal, talking about student athlete governance with us. But no matter what, student athletes are advocates. And nonetheless, we'll continue to advocate as much as we possibly can, as well as other student athletes across the country. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And let me again thank the great members of our panel for your very thoughtful comments on the subject, and it's given me, and I'm sure the other commissioners, a lot to think about. So before we close, I want to just remind everybody that we do have a press conference that the Knight Commission will hold at 12:30 right after this session to recognize 3 Division I conferences that are receiving our inaugural Care Model Conference grants. For those who would like to participate virtually, you can use the QR code on the screen to register, and the virtual link will be a different one than this link, so you'll have to go off and then back on. So in closing, I want to thank you for joining, and we hope this session was useful to all who joined and participated. Thank you very much.